Hey players, all throughout my life I've been asked the questions, do I believe in God, what religion am I, and what do I think happens when we die? So I want to share my personal answers with you guys. Hopefully there's something you guys can connect with. Growing up, these are questions I've always thought about, and my ideas on them have continued to evolve as I've learned more and more about life. When I was younger, I used to go to the Catholic Church, and that's where I learned the baseline ideas for what Christianity represented and stood for. I saw the stories from the Bible as stories in a book, much like every time I read a Goosebump book, I saw that as a story in a book. Where it was always confusing to me was that people took these stories as being true, and I later learned that the idea was to view it more like a newspaper than a novel. Still though, as a kid, I didn't really care much for them. I went to CCD classes just like I went to school. I saw it as another thing I had to learn. When I was 13 years old, I had my confirmation, and I think the coolest part about it was that I was able to choose my middle name. I of course went with Giovanni because Giovanni is the 8th Pokemon gym leader, and it was one of the names I could choose, and I thought that was pretty cool. However, once I finished those church classes, I didn't really think too much into Christianity. I kind of just saw it as something that people believed, and that was really the extent of it. And as I got older, me and my friends learned that we love to debate things. So religion, philosophy, and life were a few of those topics that we constantly talked about. We always started with nothing as the baseline. There was no idea that served as the foundation as to why we should live and how we should live. Instead, we would debate good ideas and bad ideas. Ideas that were progressive for the self and humanity, and ideas that were regressive. However, when I got to college and almost failed out, which is a story I've told you guys before, I started to question every instance of my life. What is my value? What is my purpose? Why am I here? I remember going online and looking for religious websites where I could speak to people about Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The only person that seemed to respond was this Christian minister who engaged my question and started to talk with me about why God existed and why Christianity was right. But as we got deeper and deeper into the question of why does God exist and why would he want us to do good and why would he set good, he didn't really have an answer for me. He kept falling back on the idea that we need to have faith in what God wants us to do, and his idea of what God wanted us to do was the Bible. That wasn't good enough for me though. I felt like it was an argument any person of any religion could make. As long as you have faith in my religious text, you'll be fine. Meanwhile, totally separate from debunking this religious conquest, I felt like I was having a deeper connection with the world around me, and there was no need for religion or God in that equation. There were times that I would wake up, stretch, and then see my shadow casted on the wall, and that moment right there was so beautiful. Another time, one of my roommates who lived in our suite had tied balloons from a birthday party he went to our balcony. When I woke up and saw those balloons casually blowing in the wind, I felt like I was living in that present moment. As I traveled around campus and lived my life day to day, I continued to take tons of photos of moments that I felt like I was living in. Each of these experiences were real connections I was having with just the world around me. There was no intermediary, there was no rules to follow, it was just a deep human connection that made me especially grateful for being alive. And slowly, that idea started to formulate in my mind. The fact that we are alive is reason enough to be grateful and to make the most of every moment that we have. And this was something I chose to live by. I would live for moments that I could enjoy for my entire life. But as time went on, I learned more and more. My thoughts continued to get deeper. I continued to read different books on spirituality and philosophy, and I even made a playlist of all the different book reviews of different books I've come across. I continued to live my life with this philosophy. At some point, I even decided to listen to the audiobooks of all the major religious texts just so I can understand the story and the history behind them. Let me tell you this though, I'm not here to bash religious texts. To me, they seem like a mixture of reading an old, outdated newspaper and reading Aesop's fables. I don't take them as being literal, and I don't take their ideas as being factual. And while I think there are good principles that can be taken from each of these texts, I do that with any book I read. I find the things that I think make sense and I incorporate them into my life. In fact, if you're interested in learning more about the specific ideas I felt have had the most influence on my life, check out the course that I've linked in the description below called Body and Mind Are One by Thich, Nhat Hanh. Now that you understand the context, I want to answer those questions. Do I believe in God? What religion am I? And what do I think happens when we die? What I've come to understand God to be is life and all that exists. For years, I asked myself the question, does morality, whether good or bad, exist on this top-down administrative level? And I realized, no, it doesn't. To me, I am God. The sky is God, the water is God, our coffins are God, everything amounts to God. So yes, I do view God as this very abstract concept because I feel like once we start applying emotions and feelings and actions and reactions to his behaviors, we're really just talking about him like he's a person. And the same way it would sound silly to say something like, well, the clouds are morally good, but the rocks are morally bad, is the same way we should view morality and God. He's neither good nor bad, he simply is. So why do we have morality? Honestly, I don't know. And I don't think anyone can say they have a concrete, absolute answer because it's not something that we can really prove. So to me, I don't really worry too much about asking the why question. Instead, I recognize that I have it and I realize what I could potentially do with it. And what I've come to learn is this. I realize that in this life, I don't want to experience suffering. I don't want to experience pain or hurt or violence towards myself. And because I recognize that I don't want to suffer, I can also recognize that every other living being in this world is striving to live and doesn't want to suffer as well. So on this simple principle of recognizing that I don't want to suffer, I can see that others don't want to suffer as well. So I'm going to do everything, look at every single one of my actions to make sure I don't create suffering. And that comes down to every action that I take, what I buy, what I wear, what I eat, how I interact with others. If in that exchange I'm creating suffering for someone else, I'm going to do everything I can to limit it or eliminate it. And there isn't the need of a religious text to tell me what causes suffering. I can communicate, I can observe, I can use all the skills that I have to be aware of these things. That's the most I think any of us can do in our lives, which is why I think it's such an important principle to live by. And to answer the question, what happens to us when we die? I simply don't know. All I do know is that our bodies decompose and we become one with the world again. We become the soil, we become the worms, we become the air, we become everything that exists. A lot of people have this fear of death because they don't really know what to expect once they die. But looking at our path going forward, the fact that we kind of reconnect with all that is, I think it's kind of beautiful. And that's why I choose to live my life being mindfully aware of every single one of my actions to the best of my ability. This is something that each and every single one of us can actually do, whether you're religious or not. Being mindfully aware of every single one of your actions is something that's possible. What do you think though? Are you someone that's religious or do you consider yourself to be more spiritual? Leave your comments down below and we'll talk about it. This is something I've wanted to cover for a long time because I feel like these principles are things I've baked into the Josh Speaks. They're how I choose to observe my actions and live my life. And it's the same thing I try to teach. But thank you guys so much for hearing me out. I want to hear your stories as well. As always guys, love and peace.